Hello guys, this is Don's Movies, and today I'll be giving you the origin of the Orcs, talking about how they came to be and their history based on Chronicle Volume 2. So without further ado, let's get into the lore. At the dawn of Draenor, the Evergrowth used so much of the spirit of life that it dominated the entire planet. It was not long until the Titan Agramar decided to intervene and put an end to the wild, constantly growing nature. He created a colossal by the name of Grond that inflicted a lot of damage, but ultimately failed in his mission. From his mighty corpse, the Colossals arose that continued the fight thousands of years later, defeating the last of the Spore Mounds, thus destroying the main brain of the Evergrowth. In this endeavor, most of them sacrificed themselves and have pretty much gone extinct. However, during the process, just like they came to be from Grond, new beings arose from the Colossals. These creatures would become known as Magneron, much smaller versions of them, owing no allegiance to their ancestors. Nonetheless, it was hardwired in their mind to constantly oppose the Evergrowth, even though they didn't really do it consciously. For a time they lived around the Colossals during their era, but when their ancestors ultimately sacrificed themselves, spores from the Evergrowth latched onto the hides of the Magneron, weakening their bodies, making them much different from their mountain-like forefathers. Unexpectedly, these spores affected some more than the others, and over the course of thousands of years, they would further devolve the Magneron. Initially, some would become the new creature known as the Grond, and these new creatures would devolve even further into the Ogron. The effect of the lingering spores was so significant that it didn't stop there, creating another two races, the Ogres and finally the Orcs. Many millennia later, Draenor was a completely different place, and from the now ancient memory of Grond, unique new races came to be. Even though the spores technically devolved the creatures, each race had their own unique qualities as well as weaknesses and strengths. Every single new version of the Colossals was smaller and weaker than the previous one, but more intelligent. For example, the Grond were smarter than the Magneron, but the Ogron were smarter than the Grond. In the same way, the Ogres were smarter than the Ogron, but weaker. Finally, the Orcs were the smallest of all of them, pretty much being the size of a finger of a Magneron, but they had fierce intellect and a sense of community that would ultimately make them the most powerful race. Additionally, the first three, Magneron, Gron, and Ogron, were collectively known as Breakers, and they had strong wiring to oppose the remnants of the Evergrowth. This sense would become much weaker, if not non-existent, in the Ogres and the Orcs. Now, all of these races did share common ancestry, but that did not make them allies in any way. Much to the opposite, the weaker Breakers were slaves to the stronger and the older ones. The Gron at this point, thousands of years later in history, were few and far between and preferred solitude, even fighting other Gron if it came to territory. However, the more numerous Ogron learned the value of working together and formed some rudimentary society. The Ogron tribes battled between each other, even going as far as enslaving Ogre tribes that were beneath them and either using them as slaves or as living sacrifices to the Gron in order to get peace. However, the smallest Breaker descendants, the Orcs, were smart enough to realize that they can't compete with the Ogron when it comes to sheer strength, and they decided to stay far away from their lands. Because of this, they formed their biggest settlement in a cave system beneath Gorgrond, and even though the conditions were not great compared to the rest of the world, at least they weren't being used as slaves by the Ogron. The planet worked this way for a very long time, but soon enough, things would change. With the help of the Arakoa, the ogres decided to finally free themselves from this age-long oppression. The ogre Gog, later known as Gog the Grandslayer, was taught arcane magic, and in order to start the rebellion, he didn't target the oppressors of the ogres, the Ogron, but instead went out and single-handedly killed multiple Gron. This was just completely mind-blowing for the Ogron, as the Gron were seen as gods, and if a measly ogre can defeat one, what is to stop the other ogres from freeing themselves? These actions started the rebellion, and nearly every single Ogron tribe fell under the ogres. From that point forth, the Ogron that survived were scattered across the world, never fully recovering. This was the rise of the Gorian Ogre Empire that would soon dominate most of Draenor, but also the rise of the Orcs. Some 800 years ago, the Orcs decided to leave their underground homes and forge permanent settlements on the surface of the world. It wasn't long until their population completely exploded and many new clans and families were formed. The original Gorgond ones were the Blackrock, Laughing Skull, Lightning's Blade, and Dragon Maw. However, many smaller ones moved out across most of the planet, and from these migrating orcs, new clans would emerge, such as the Bleeding Hollow, Frostwolf, Burning Blade, Warsong, and many others. As opposed to their ancestors, the ogres, orcs took their sense of community extremely seriously, and shamanism was the glue that bound everything together. The Shadowbone clan was the first to really dedicate themselves to the elements, and they transformed the actual head of Grond, the large colossal that was created by Agramar, into a temple dedicated to the spirits of the world. These teachings would later spread across other orcish communities, and it soon enough became the most important custom to a large number of orcish clans. For about 400 years, the ogres lived in relative peace with the orcs and really saw them as nothing more than weak ogres practicing their superstitious shamanism, nothing like the real power they extracted from the arcane. However, this viewpoint would soon enough change, as at one point, when the ogres observed an orc shaman saving a village from a flood, they were in complete shock. The action incited Imperator Moloch to send an army into the Orcish territory and claim the throne of elements with force. They then experimented with arcane, but this suddenly created a dissonance, and the temple created from the head of Grond was blown into pieces. This action significantly steered the elementals, but the ogres didn't relent and just sent more and more sorcerers to claim this power for themselves. The Orcish clans, left with no choice, united and waged war on the mighty Ogre Empire. The war was incredibly bloody, there were casualties all over the place, ogres dominated for a while, but nonetheless the orcs would eventually lay siege to their capital, the city of Goria. The Imperator decided to create a disease from the arcane that would soon enough spread into orc encampments that was incredibly devastating, making their chances of taking over the city at this point pretty much non-existent. So the shamans, desperate right now, besieged the elements to annihilate Goria, which was an incredibly risky and bold request. Nonetheless, the elementals responded, and the entire city was swallowed by the earth beneath them. The Gorian Empire never fully recovered, and the remaining ogre fortresses, Heimol and Bladespire Hold, would eventually turn into city-states, nothing like the former powerful empire. Now, the orcs came to dominate a large part of Draenor as the single most united race, even though still split into numerous clans. For around 400 years, this would be the case, but eventually everything would change with the arrival of the Draenei and the Burning Legion taking an interest in the world of Draenor. Alright, and that is all I have for this video. Do leave your feedback and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this, and also like the video as it really helps out and keeps all the content going. Thanks a lot for taking the time out of the day to watch this video, and see you next time.